All right, good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to provide a screencast of a walkthrough of the example that we went over in lecture, looking at how to run through moderation effects in SPSS. Again, so for this demo, we're going to be using the same handout we worked through in class. Again, the data that we're working with here, looking at responses from individuals who have been exposed to serious motor vehicle trauma. And among these survivors of motor vehicle accidents, what we're interested in are effects on determining role functioning. So in these data, remember we have a role functioning variable that indicates higher scores indicating greater levels of functioning in day-to-day activities. We had found some difficulties with this in initial screening, but again, we're going to ignore those problems with the outcome variable for right now. Predictors in this model are going to be our continuous indicator of PTSD symptom severity, our continuous indicator of MBA-related pain, and then a dichotomous indicator of whether or not a participant is actively using opiate medications for pain relief or not. And so in this example, in addition to our first order effects of pain, PTSD, and opiate use, we're also interested in moderated effects, specifically wanting to know whether or not use of opiate medications influences the impact of physical pain on role functioning. So this is how we might demonstrate that model here, with pain as the conditional effect and opiate use as the moderator. Also interested in the extent to which pain severity changes the relationship between PTSD and role functioning. Again, in this situation, PTSD being the conditional effect, pain being the moderator, just with the way we've conceptualized this. So again, these are the same data that we went through in class, the same handout. Just want to work through step by step in SPSS how we're going through and testing these interactive effects in the model. So, going to start out again. Here's our SPSS set. This is our exercise regression set that I'm working with here. We've got our participant, pain severity, opiate use, yes, no, our PTSD indicator, and then our measure of role functioning. So I'm going to first do with this, I'm going to start out by making sure that I center my predictors. So if I go to Analyze, Descriptives, got these loaded up in here. So I'm looking at descriptive statistics for pain severity, opiate use, and PTSD. I'm going to go through and paste those into my syntax file here. Drop this down so I can get everything on the same page. All right. So what I'm going to do first, run my descriptives so I can get my variables, my indicator, my predictors centered here. So 3 predictors here. Here's my mean values. And so again, to center these, I'm just going to go compute. We'll call this centered pain is equal to my pain variable minus, then we go through and take a look at my variable here. Well, I'll just type it in, 4.0702. Okay, and then I'm just going to do the same thing for opiate use and PTSD. So my centered PTSD, we'll do opiate use first. It's going to be opioid minus, and it's looking like the mean here is 0.5, and then for my centered PTSD, it's going to be PTSD minus 50.5 9303. Okay. So remember what this is going to do is it's going to center all my variables so that the mean value for pain, opiate use, and PTSD is all going to be equal to 0. We're just taking each one of these variables, or my raw variables, subtracting the mean. Opiate use is a little bit, now this is a dichotomous indicator, and so you wouldn't necessarily have to center this variable. I'm going to for the main model, because again, if we get an interactive effect, interaction of opiate use and pain, PTSD and pain, if we don't center this, if we just use the regular, just the raw dummy code, the 0, 1, no use, what we're doing is we're looking at effects specifically for the no use group, because again, our effects in our regression model are giving us the unique relation of our variable with our outcome when all of the variables in the model are held constant at 0. If we center opiate use, at least for this initial first model, it just says it gives us effects of X on Y, controlling for or averaging across opiate use here. So we're going to go through and first run our data. And so it looks like in SPSS, here's my centered pain, centered opiate use, centered PTSD. And this is always like to go through and check just to make sure that I've done this correctly. If I now go through and I drop in centered pain, centered opiate use, and centered PTSD, go through and run this, and I see that, yep, looks like my mean now is 0 for each one of these variables. Standard deviation doesn't change at all, obviously, when we center, but looks like everything's looking good at this point. Okay, so got my centered variables, but now what I want to do is I want to go through and I want to create my interaction terms. In SPSS, we need to build these on our own, and so I'm going to go through again, hit compute, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a interaction effect for my pain and PTSD. So I'm going to compute pain times PTSD and set that equal to my centered pain times centered PTSD. Okay, so that gets my pain by PTSD interaction, and then I'm going to do the same thing. Compute. This time I'm going to look at opiate use times pain, set that equal to C opioid times C pain. Okay, and so what this is going to do is it's just going to go through and it's going to create my two interaction terms. So I run those, looks like it's doing all right. I go through, take a look. Yep, here's my pain times PTSD and my opiate use times pain interactions here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I want to go through and run my overall model. So I'm going to go Analyze, Regression, Linear. Outcome is my role functioning variable. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in I'm going to switch this around a little bit. I'm going to go centered opiate use, centered pain, centered PTSD, and then my PTSD by pain, and my PTSD, and my opiate use by PTSD. So I've got my 3 first order effects, my 2 higher order interactions that are consistent with my 2 moderation effects I'm interested in examining here. And so got my model built, and then I'm going to go to statistics. Here I'm going to ask for part and partial correlations, confidence intervals, so I can go through and assess those other stuff we would look at in screening, but we don't really need to worry about that for right now. So I'm just going to hit continue. Everything else we've used in screening stuff, we won't worry about it here, so I'll just paste my model in. So go through, I'm going to run this, and I get in terms of my output. Here's my model R squared, so my total for the entire model, it looks as though the best linear combination of pain, opiate use, and PTSD, and the interaction of pain and opiate use and pain and PTSD is accounting for 42.6% of the total variability in role functioning in these data. Here's my adjusted R squared to account for upward bias of my R squared. My ANOVA table here is telling me that my R squared value is reliably different than 0, right? Here's the F for that, my significance test. And then if we expand this out, going down through and taking a look at my individual coefficients, I'm seeing that here's my constant. All of the this is the expected value of role functioning when all of the variables are held constant at 0. That means when opiate use, pain, or this is the expected value of functioning for people at average levels of pain and average levels of PTSD, controlling for opiate use, we would expect a role functioning value of 10.03. Taking a look at my individual effects, no reliable effect of my centered opiate use, but I do have what looks like a conditional effect of pain, conditional effect of PTSD, and then if I look at my interaction terms, we're going to call both of these statistically significant. This is marginal, but it's right on the other edge. I'm not going to ignore that just because it's not exactly less than 0.05 here. So looks as though we have two moderation effects here. Based on, again, the way we've conceptualizing this, I'm going to interpret this first effect as indicating evidence for an influence of pain severity on the relation between PTSD and functioning. And here I'm going to interpret this as evidence for differences in the relation between pain and role functioning for people who are and who aren't using opiates. Okay, so first thing, so we've got a couple of different interaction effects. And what I'm going to encourage you guys to do and have you do in our examples is go through and factor these this equation out by hand. This is a nice thing to do. Remember, there's always important to double check these moderation analyses because it's really easy to get hiccups or errors and things along those lines. And so one of the things that I like to do is once I've got my base model here is to go through and actually hand factor this out just to make sure that I have a handle on what's what. So if we go through and we take, here's my intercept, 10.04, my coefficient for opiate use, my coefficient for pain, my coefficient for PTSD, the interaction of opiate use and pain, the interaction of pain and PTSD. Write these out. We've got my, this is my base model here. And what we can start doing is we can start factoring this out. Now remember, what we want to do is first pull down anything that's not included in our conditional effects, right? So we've got two conditional effects here where we've modeled or are interested in the way we're thinking about this. We've got a conditional effect of PTSD and a conditional effect of pain, with pain and drug use and opiate use as our moderators, okay? So I can pull down my intercept because that's not one of my conditional effects. And I can pull down opiate use because opiate use isn't included in one of my conditional effects. It's a moderator, but it's not included in a conditional effect. And then what I can go through is, when I'm doing this, I just like to go through and section off preemptively. I've got a conditional effect of pain and a conditional effect of PTSD. Kind of bracket those two off. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and say, all right, what are my values, or what are the terms that are consistent with my conditional effect of pain? Well, we've got my effect of pain here, right? So I'm going to drop this down. So negative 10.05, the coefficient here, plus the coefficient for my opiate use times pain or interaction. Now we've got pain over here, but that's involved in a different conditional effect. So we're just going to pull this down. So we've got pull down the coefficient for pain, pull down the coefficient for my interaction of opiate use and pain. So we've got those taken care of. And then what's remaining, we've got our conditional effect of PTSD and the coefficient that's involved in the interaction term, pull that down for my coefficients for PTSD. And so what we can see now in my restructured equation is that the influence of pain, or the impact of pain on role functioning, is dependent on opiate use, right? So depending on what value I put in for opiate use, 0, 1, that's going to impact what my coefficient is, my conditional effect of pain. Same thing, my conditional effect of PTSD. My effect of PTSD on role functioning is dependent on pain. So depending on what value for pain I include in here, it's going to change the value of this coefficient here. And so we see that pain is conditioned on opiate use, and that PTSD is conditioned on pain. If I were to go through and multiply this model back out, I would get sort of what I started with. Always a good, again, double check on whether or not you've done this correctly. Okay, and so again, we went through this in class, but just wanted to walk through it again, because now what we can do, just with our base model, we can actually figure out what our simple slopes are for both the interactive effect or the conditional effect of PTSD and the conditional effect of pain. So if we start with simple slopes for the conditional effect of PTSD, right? Again, we're interested in the extent to which pain changes the nature of the relation between PTSD and role functioning. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through and substitute high and low values of pain, holding everything else constant at the mean. Okay, and what this is going to do is it's going to give me the moderating effect of pain on the relation of PTSD and role functioning. So if I start with high pain here, okay, here, and this is just my restructured equation right here, right? If I'm, take this restructured equation and just drop it down here, got my intercept, my effect of opiate use, my conditional effect of pain, and my conditional effect of PTSD, okay? But here, what we're interested in is the conditional effect of PTSD given high and low levels of pain. And so, where's my cursor? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go down through and say, if I'm holding everything else constant at 0, interested in the conditional effect of PTSD on outcome holding everything else constant at 0, I'm putting in zeros for my opiate use terms. So opiate use takes a hike. Opiate use is gone, right? And so with those canceled out, I'm left with my intercept, my coefficient for what's left over for pain, and then my conditional effect here. So based on our data, we know that and again, our high and low levels, generally we typically model these as corresponding to standard deviation above and standard deviation below. If I know that my pain variable has a standard deviation of plus or minus 1.34, that's because this variable is centered. High values, or a standard deviation above the mean, is going to correspond to pain values of 1.34. Values below the mean, negative 1.34. So here, looking at high pain, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to plug a value of 1.34 in for pain here and for pain here. And if I do that and multiply this out, I get a simple slopes equation for the effect of pain on role functioning at the conditional effect of PTSD on role functioning at high levels of pain is going to be negative 3.43 plus 0.04 PTSD. And so 0.04, this is my simple slope of PTSD conditioned on high pain severity. All right. Same thing for low pain. I can just jump off and start here because I already know I'm holding opiate use constant at 0, which means I'm just controlling for it, because remember we centered that variable. So controlling for or averaging across opiate use, I have my equation for PTSD and pain here, but this time, because I'm looking at low levels of pain, I'm just going to drop in negative 0.134, or a standard deviation below for my level of pain, drop that in, bring this down, and so what I end up with now is my simple slope, or my conditional effect of PTSD at low levels of pain. So here, intercept of 23.54 minus 0.42 PTSD, 0.42 being the simple slope of PTSD conditioned on low levels of pain severity. Okay, So we can do all this, factoring these variables out, just based on coefficients in my base model. And what I can also do with this is now drop in and start modeling, graphing out my simple slopes. This is always important to do because it's going to give you a visual representation of what's going on with these simple slopes. So again, in Excel, this is a pretty easy thing to do. If we say, here's my simple slope at low pain, simple slopes at high pain, and what we're going to do for, let's start with low pain here. My equation is 23.51 minus 0.42 PTSD. So here, if we just in Excel, in this cell, we just hit equals and then plug in your equation, 23.51 minus 0.42 times low levels of PTSD. Again, this is just going to be a standard deviation above and below your centered PTSD variable. Standard deviation of PTSD in these data is negative 19.76. So we go through, drop that into my equation here, and so I get a value or point estimate for my expected value of role functioning for low levels of PTSD combined with low levels of pain. Same thing, and this should be 7.6. Whoops. High and low levels. There we go. And so here, same thing, equals my simple slopes equation for low pain, but now I'm just plugging in high levels of PTSD. So we got that. Same thing. This just going to be my simple slopes equation plugging in for the conditional effect of PTSD at high levels of pain. So here it's negative 3.43 plus 0.04 times low levels of PTSD. Same thing. Simple slopes for high pain at high PTSD. What this is going to do is it's just going to give us our point estimates for role functioning at combinations of low pain, low PTSD, low pain, high PTSD, high pain and low PTSD, high pain and high PTSD, gives us our simple slopes equation, or our simple slopes graph right here. So we see here at low levels of pain a very strong negative relation, or at least reasonably strong, clear negative association between PTSD and role functioning at low levels of pain, and then something that looks like a positive coefficient here, which we also saw here. This is a positive coefficient for the relation of PTSD and role functioning at high levels of pain. Okay, so remember, all of this you can get from just your base model, right? But the one thing that we can't get is we don't know whether or not this conditional effect of PTSD, this conditional effect of PTSD at high pain and low pain are statistically significant. And this starts to become important again because it looks like at least the absolute value of my coefficient for the relation between PTSD and role functioning at high levels of pain is positive, suggesting that maybe as our PTSD symptom severity gets worse or higher, our role functioning increases. So we want to go through and take a look and see whether or not this is a statistically significant effect, as well as this here. Okay, so but we don't get that from here. We get point estimates, but we don't get statistical significance. So what I can do, though, is I can start recentering where my moderator falls. Remember, we did this in class. What we want to do is we're going to go through and recenter our moderator, our pain variable, to correspond to high and low levels of pain. Okay, so again, if I grab my descriptive statistics just so I can go down through and kind of see what's going on here, and I run this, I see, again, in high and low levels are generally, we're going to identify those as corresponding to a standard deviation above and below. So I see, if I want to recenter my variable so that 0 corresponds to high levels of pain and 0 corresponds to low levels of pain, I see that my standard deviation for my pain variable is 1.34. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple new variables. So I'm going to compute low pain. Pull this up so you can see it. Low pain is going to be equal to my centered pain variable. And what I'm going to do is for low levels of pain, I'm going to add 1.34187. Okay. Now remember what we're doing here. This seems counterintuitive, right? That we're adding a standard deviation to get low levels of pain. But remember, if I'm at average levels of pain, my score is 0 in my centered pain variable. But if we go through and we add a standard deviation to everybody in the set, now my value of 0, where I was at the mean, so my average levels are now consistent with a value of 1.34, right? And 0 in my low pain variable now corresponds to values that are a standard deviation below, right? And so then what I'm going to do, so this is, I'm going to, create my low levels of pain. But now I'm going to create another variable. It's going to be high pain. And high pain is going to be my centered pain variable minus a standard deviation. Again, seems counterintuitive, but if my value of pain is at the mean of my centered variable, so I have mean values of pain, so my value is 0. But if we go through and we subtract a standard deviation from everybody, me at the average now has a value of negative 1.34. 0 now corresponds to a standard deviation above. So just watch this as you're going through and working on this, that when we're creating high and recentering our moderator to be consistent with high and low levels, to get low levels, we're going to add a standard deviation. To get high levels, we're going to subtract a standard deviation. Okay, so I'm going to go through, run this, get this out of the way, and we're going to see now that, oops, not stata. We're going to see that I now have a variable for low pain and a variable for high pain. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to compute new interaction terms. So any of my interactive effects that contained pain, I need to go through and now create a new interaction effect that is consistent with my new variable that contains low levels of pain. So here I've got both of my interaction terms involve pain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new interaction term. I'm going to call it low pain times PTSD is going to be equal to my my low pain variable times my centered PTSD. I'm going to do the same thing. But this time I'm going to create a new interaction term. Corresponds to high pain times PTSD. And then I'm just going to substitute my high pain variable here. Okay, so I've got two new interaction terms. One is the interaction of pain and PTSD with pain centered at low levels, and one is going to be the interaction of pain and PTSD where pain centered at high variables. Okay, so this gets at my conditional effect that I'm interested in right now, the conditional effect of PTSD at high and low levels of pain. But I've also got in my regression model, pain is involved in opiate use as well. So that everything's consistent, I should probably go through and create a interaction terms so that those are all sort of consistent with everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take low pain multiplied by opiate use, and I'm just going to take low pain times centered opiate use. I'm going to do the same thing and just correspond to high levels. So this is going to be high levels of pain times opiate use, that interaction will be there. Okay, so what I've done to get my simple slopes is I've gone through and I've recentered my moderator, pain, at high and low levels of pain. And again, high and low levels being a standard deviation above and a standard deviation below. And then what I'm going to do, and so that my model is all consistent, I'm going to rerun my model, but now I need new interaction terms corresponding to the interaction of pain and PTSD when I've adjusted pain so that 0 is consistent with low levels, and an interaction of pain and PTSD where my pain variable is adjusted to high levels. And then because I've got another interaction of opiate use and pain that involves pain, I just went through and created a new interaction terms where low pain, this is the interaction of pain and opiate use at low levels of pain, and the interaction of opiate use and pain, again, where we've got high levels of pain. And then what I'm going to do is I can go up through and I can just take my regression model here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create and take a look at regression models in this situation where I've got my opiate use, but for this one I'm going to substitute my low pain variable. Okay. So I've got opiate use, low pain, centered PTSD, and then I'm going to take my low pain times PTSD variable and my low pain times opiate use. Okay, so what I've got here is I'm looking at the conditional effect of PTSD when pain is centered at low levels, and then my interaction terms are all consistent with my recentered variable corresponding to low levels of pain. Then I can take this and pull this up, run this again. Okay, so I'm going to run a second model here, but this time I'm going to condition everything on high levels of pain. So I've got controlling for opiate use because we've centered my dichotomous indicator here. I've 0 for pain corresponding to high levels of pain. Here's my conditional effect of PTSD. But now I'm going to take a look at this for my interaction of high pain times PTSD and my interaction of high pain times opiate use. Okay, make sure you've got your period there at the end. And what this is going to do, these models, and I've already got them, I already calculated my simple slopes here, but what these models are going to do is they're going to allow me to test the statistical significance of my conditional effect of pain with role functioning at condition on low levels of pain and condition on high levels of pain. This is also going to give me calculate effect sizes for me, things along these lines. Okay, so if I go through and I run my model here, oh whoops, I didn't actually calculate all these. There we go. And if we go through and we take a look at our actual data set, we see we now have interaction terms for low pain and PTSD, high pain and PTSD, low pain and opiate use, high pain and opiate use. So everything's looking good here. So I go down through and I run my regression model. All right. So what we've got is my model for, and actually let's just do this so we can, I'll go back up and I'll run my original base model. And then my conditional effects for PTSD at low levels of pain. Okay. So if we go up and we take a look here, R squared for my base model, 0.426 with an F of 28.968. Go down through, we see 4.426, 28.968. None of this changes, right? And if we look at my individual coefficients, we should see, remember that my higher order the coefficients for my higher order effects shouldn't change at all. 0.170, 4.603, 1.70, 4.603. This is good. This tells me that things are working the way it should. But what I'm interested in here, in terms of my conditional effect of PTSD, is my coefficient for PTSD at low levels of pain. Now, up here in my base model, my conditional effect of PTSD is looking at the effect of PTSD, the unique effect of PTSD on role functioning at average levels of pain, controlling for opiate use. And that's negative 0.185, which is statistically significant, right? So this is the conditional effect of PTSD at average levels of pain, controlling for opiate use. But here in my revised model, I'm looking at the conditional effect of PTSD on role functioning at low levels of pain, where low levels of pain are corresponding to pain that's a standard deviation below the mean. Again, controlling for opiate use. And here we see my unstandardized coefficient is negative 0.413. It's statistically significant. Here's my partial correlation, my semi-partial correlation. So this is giving me effect sizes for this conditional effect here. And so I see that I have a statistically significant effect of pain on role functioning at low levels of pain. Importantly, if we go through and we take a look at what we had calculated for my conditional effect of low levels of pain, or PTSD at low levels of pain, we see 23.518, 23.51, we're pretty close. Some a little bit of rounding error, conditional effect negative 0.413, 0.42, everything adds up, right? But what we get out of SPSS here is a test of the statistical significance, and then my part and partial correlations that are giving me my effect sizes. Okay, so we can then say that this simple slope is negative and statistically significant. But now let's go through and take a look at simple slopes for the relation of PTSD with role functioning conditioned on high levels of pain. So if we go through, run my second model here. Now what this is going to give me is the conditional effect of PTSD at high levels of pain. Again, models R-squared doesn't change at all. My model statistics all stay the same. My interaction terms, these are my highest order effects, remain consistent. But what I see now is the conditional effect of PTSD conditioned on when all other variables are held constant at 0, that is, at high levels of pain, controlling for opiate use. I see that my coefficient of 0.043, my simple slope of PTSD at high levels of pain, is not statistically significant. And my effect sizes, my part and partial correlations are very, very small in this, right? So again, what we can say, if we go through and take a look, negative 0.344, negative 343, 0.04, 0.04, everything matches up with our hand calculations, which is good. And again, I can't stress enough the importance of going through and double checking this. But my simple slope of PTSD conditioned on high pain severity, 0.04, is not statistically significant, right? So even though we have a positive coefficient here, this is not this slope is not reliably different than 0. We can ignore this and say that our data fails to provide evidence of a unique effect or a unique association of PTSD with role functioning conditioned on high levels of pain. Okay, so that gets us everything we would want to do for our conditional effect of PTSD on functioning at high and low levels of pain. Okay, but remember that we also had a second interactive effect here, wanting to look at opiate use as a moderator of the relation between between pain and functioning. And again, we found in our base model, right? So this is our base model. We found that our interaction of opiate use and pain also, we'll call it meeting criteria for further exploration. Okay, and again, my interaction here, this is a little bit different because I've got a dichotomous variable, but basically what this is saying is that the relation of the relation of physical pain and role functioning is dependent on whether or not people are using opiates or not. Okay, and so what I can do is I can take my restructured equation that I got up here, right? That's the same when we went through and factored out. This was my restructured equation here. I can go through and use that same equation to now go through and take a look at my conditional effective pain for people who aren't using opiates. Okay, so if here's my model, 10.04. And again, this is just from my base model here. So we got 10.04 minus my centered opiate use, and then we've got restructured for my interaction terms, things along those lines. What I can do, again, in this set, people who aren't using opiates have a value of negative 0.5 when we centered that. People who are using opiates have a value of 0.5. Now, this is only because we have almost identical numbers of people who are using and not using opiates. So to make sure that you're centering that correctly, you're going to center your dichotomous indicators exactly how you would your continuous indicators. It's just you may get different values for 0 or no sort of first category, your other category, if you don't have exactly balanced design. So this won't always be negative 0.5 and 0.5. But because we're interested in this case in looking at the conditional effective pain for people who are and aren't using opiates, holding everything else constant at 0, well, that means PTSD is held constant at 0. That takes all of that out. So we're just left with 10.04 times my coefficient for opiate use plus my conditional effective pain. If we go through, plug in negative 0.5, which indicates people without using opiates, we then get my simple slope of pain with role functioning for individuals not using opiates. Okay, so again, intercept here, 10.47 minus 12.35 pain. This negative 12.35, this is the simple slope of pain for individuals not using opiate medications. Same thing if we want to look at calculate our simple slopes for people who are using. We can go through, we can just start right here, right? Plug in values for people who are using opiates. In our set, people who are using opiates have a value of 0.5. We drop 0.5 in for opiate use, run this out, and I get my simple slope for pain with role functioning for individuals who are using opiates. Again, here it's negative 7.75. This is going to be the simple slope of pain for individuals who are using opiate medications. Okay, so this gives me my conditional effective pain for people who aren't using opiates, who are using opiates, and again, I can go through and graph this out so I can see what those simple slopes look like. Again, this is my conditional effect of pain for individuals who aren't using opiates. So again, all I've done here in Excel is plugged in my simple slope for no opiate use. It's 10.47 minus 12.35 times, and again, standard deviation below, standard deviation above my centered pain variable, so that's negative 1.34 and 1.34. So I'm just taking the same equation here for my simple slope for no opiate use, plugging in low levels of pain, high levels of pain, and this is giving me my expected level of point estimates of my expected level of role functioning at low levels of pain and high levels of pain for people who aren't using opiates. And the same thing. Here I've entered my simple slope for individuals who are using opiates. That's 9.61 minus 7.75 times pain. Here we got my equation. Plugging in low levels of pain gives me my expected value. Same thing, same equation, just plugging in high levels of pain, standard deviation above. And what that gives me here is a graph of my simple slope for the conditional effective pain on role functioning for people who aren't using meds and for those people who are using meds. Okay, so again, this gives us most of the stuff we need, but what we might want to do is verify that this is both of these simple slopes correspond to a statistically significant association. Okay, so what we can do is we can go through, and this is gonna be a little bit different, because what we want to do is we want to measure the unique effect of pain on we need to look at the unique effect of pain on role functioning for people who are and who aren't using opiates. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I can do this. Well, here, let's do this. So I'm going to create again a new interaction because in my data, if I go through, I already have a variable, my initial opiate variable, where no use is 0 and use is 1. Okay, and so what I can do is I can go through and compute a new interaction term. We'll call it no op times no opiate use times pain is equal to opioid times my centered pain variable. Is that what my centered pain variable is? Yep. Okay. So what this is I've created a new interaction term where my 0 for opiate use now corresponds to no use, right? But I've already got a variable in here where 0 corresponds to no use. So what I can do now is I can go through and estimate a regression model. Here we'll go grab my main one, so I'm regressing role functioning on, instead of centered opiate use, I'm just going to use my original dummy code where 0 equals no use, 1 equals use, drop that in. Then I got my centered pain, centered PTSD, pain times PTSD, opiate use isn't a part of that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my recoded interaction term where I'm looking at the interaction of no opiate use and pain. Okay, so again, what I've got is my original dummy code where opiate use, where 0 equals no use, centered pain, centered PTSD, and then the interaction of pain and PTSD and no opiate use times pain. Okay, so if I go through and I run these, I now get a model. And again, if I take a look at my conditional effect of pain, this is telling me the unique effect of pain on role functioning, holding PTSD constant at the mean for individuals who aren't using opiates, because with my dummy code, 0 for opiate use means people who aren't using opiates. And so I get my conditional effect of pain is statistically significant, my part and partial correlations for that. But if I go through and I take a look at my simple slopes that I calculated by hand for no opiate use, 10.47, 10.47, negative 12.35, negative 12.35, everything's looking good. So we know at no opiate use, we have a statistically significant slope going on right here. Okay, but now my question is, how do I go through and do I get a coefficient, or how do I test for people who are using? Well, this actually ends up being pretty easy and straightforward. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my data set, and I'm going to insert variable, and I'm going to call this variable opioid R. This is going to be my reverse code for opiate use. Okay. My reverse code. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to sort opiate use. Okay. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to reverse this around. So I'm going to take and enter a value of 1 for everybody who's not using. I'm going to enter a value of 0 for everybody who is using. Okay, so what I've got now is I've created a new variable, a reverse-coded opiate use variable where 1 is equal to use, or excuse me, 1 is equal to no use, and 0 is equal to use. So with this, now all I have to do is go back through, and I'm going to now create a new interaction term, and I'm going to call it yes opiate times pain, where I'm going to include my variable is going to be my opioid R times C pain. I'm going to run this. Okay. And so what I've got now, I'm going to run my regression model where instead of my dummy code for opiate use where 0 indicates no use, 1 indicates use, I'm going to run a regression model with my recoded variable where 0 equals use, 1 equals no use, times pain, times centered PTSD. Pain times PTSD doesn't matter because opiate use isn't in this. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to model this with my interaction of opiate use yes times pain, where 0 equals use, 1 equals no use. So switching this around, go through, run this, and what I've got is my conditional effect of pain with role functioning for individuals who are using opiates. Again, because, and I am interpreting this way because with my reverse-coded opiate use, 0 corresponds to people who are using, 1 corresponds to people who aren't using, and so what I've got here is my conditional effect of pain on role functioning for people who are using. We see that this is also statistically significant part and partial correlations. If I go through, take a look at my, oops, not my simple slopes yet, at my conditional effect here, I see 9.607, 9.61, negative 7.74, right? Within rounding error here, everything's matching up. But now what I can determine within my analyses here is that yes, the simple slope or the conditional effect of pain on role functioning continues to be statistically significant for people who are using opiates. But I know that because my interaction in my original base model was statistically significant, that my conditional effect of pain for people who are using is reliably smaller than the conditional effect of the conditional effect of pain for people who are not using opiates. And so again, if I go through and I take a look at this, it looks like yes, pain. As pain increases, role functioning decreases, but that association is weaker for people who are using medications as opposed to those who aren't, which kind of makes some sense. If these medications are doing what they should be doing, the relation between physical pain and functioning should probably get weaker if those pain medications are helping with anything. Same thing here. It looks like PTSD holds a strong negative association with role functioning for people who have low levels of pain. But for people who with high levels of pain, looks like it doesn't matter your level of PTSD, functioning stays pretty much equal for people who are in intense physical pain. Okay, so that takes us through our simple slopes analyses. Again, everything that we've done here just mirrors everything that you've gotten in your handout. So if you just go through and follow that along, that should give you a good sense of how to go through and walk through, interpret some of this stuff. But if you have questions, let me know. These analyses can be kind of tricky, so don't spend too much time struggling on your own. Make sure to come out and reach out to us to get some help. So good luck, and we'll see you guys soon.